somebody up north what security means to them, they're not going to talk about military ships and the planes, F-18 base that they have in Inuvialuit and all these different dual-line sites and what have you. That's not security. It really is about what it is they can do from a personal perspective in ensuring that their families are fed and healthy and happy.
Inuit security is more about having used and occupied the land, not only the land, but the coastal waters and the oceans for our way of life.
Inulunga ng menakotakang nagtareong miglo nunamiglo tamakkuninga avatinik Tunngavik Kirt.
Well, security to me personally means that I am taken care of, especially having had caring parents who took care of us as children, and it was good to always know that my father and my mother would take care of all of our needs.
I think security begins at home, at the grassroots. When you're born, your parents and the whole village make sure that we are safe and secure, not only in body, but in mind. And our hunters make sure that we don't go hungry in all seasons. And when we were living on the land, the main meaning of security was survival.
For us, security means also that we have to live in a peaceful environment so that we can thrive in our life.
Security for me is feeling safe on our lands, in our communities, and having the ability to freely move around, the ability to practice our own way.
We should look at security in the whole Arctic sense, where the Inuit are the rightful owners of the land and the water. And I guess the security part comes in when our governments don't respect our way of life.
What makes me feel safe or secure? Being able to put food on the table, being able to live my life comfortably, in an understanding where we stand in the global context, and having a say in a lot of that.
A lot has happened to Inuit that are quite negative in the past. Okay, so despite all of that, despite the many government policies that have negatively affected us, today most of us still remain very proud Canadians.
We often look to the past and learn how in the old days our parents, our grandparents were sort of shuffled along in sort of in the name of sovereignty, in the name of sort of the government, and we're very much used as pawns.
Forced relocations for Inuit by the Canadian government, moving from the land, forced to move into a settlement, quote unquote, with the government colonialism, killing by the RCMP of Inuit dogs in the 1950s and 60s, issue of resident to school. And yet, in the end, we are very proud to be Canadian. We are very proud to have survived.
Look at what happened in the past. There were relocations to the high Arctic, for example. I believe that it was because of sovereignty, right? Canada wanted to make sure that people lived there so that they could lay claim to that area as their own.
When I was younger and didn't know a lot about how Canada treated Native people, I felt lucky to be part of Canada, and I always celebrated Canada Day on July 1st. But then, as I got older, I learned more about how Native people were treated in Canada, including Inuit, and how we lost our own sovereignty as Inuit people. We no longer had control over our lives like we once did before Canada came into existence. I didn't feel as patriotic as a Canadian then when I realized that our Indigenous rights were not recognized. But after the land claims agreement was signed in 2005 for Nilliajut, then I felt more patriotic as a Canadian, because then I felt like Canada recognized us as a people and honored who we are, and we felt more valued as a citizen.
Respect what Inuit have done for your country, for my country.
When you look at it in the context of Canadian Inuit, each region has been successful in negotiating their land claim, and each of those land claims recognizes that Inuit have been large contributors to the Canadian Arctic sovereignty.
Sovereignty is people. You know, you can have any amount of ships or any amount of planes flying back and forth, but it's really the Inuit and the Inuvialuit who create the sovereignty, because we've always been there, our people have always been there, and the fact that people create the sovereignty and not other criteria for wealth creation by different countries.
Sovereignty means being in control of your own affairs. I guess as a country, Canada is a sovereign nation, but as Nunavut in Northern Labrador, we are more sovereign now since the Land Claims Agreement and Self-Government Agreement was signed. We have the potential to take control over our own lives, very similar to the way that we had control over our own lives before colonialization. So I think we are back on the road to being a sovereign nation again.
For me, sovereignty means that Aboriginal people owns the Arctic, the North, because way before there was government, they lived there.
So sovereignty, I think in its simplest form, is the right to govern ourselves and also the land that we live on and the waters that we use.
The government may have researched a lot of the North. They know about it, but our Aboriginal people knows more about it, and they know it in their heart, not on a paper.
We feel that we have a lot of ownership to the Arctic because we've been protecting the Arctic for many, many thousands of years now, way before Europeans were coming into our country 400 or 500 years ago.
I think as long as the international, countries recognize the land claims, then they should see that this country is already claimed, and so maybe they wouldn't invade.
When agreements become disrespected, that's when there can be a risk, there can be a threat. Up to now, for us in Nunavut, our land claims agreement has been respected, and if that respect is there, we should feel secure.
I think the land claims are very much the starting point. I think Southerners look at that as the end point, and I think that's where I'm hopeful that we could build upon the land claims that we have, because they're very much the meat and potatoes of how activities are happening in our territories and how governments have to deal with us in the governance of our land.
Because our land claims agreement is recognized throughout Canada, the Inuvialuit have a very, very powerful voice, and I think when the topic of sovereignty comes, the Inuvialuit aren't representing Canada, but they're also representing themselves.
If we try to go at this as individual land claims holders, then it's not going to be so effective as if we work together, and we can do it through our own agreements. We have that power.
This is Inuit territory. Inuit occupied and use the sea ice for our way of life. That is how we survived for a millennia. And this is the best defense that Ottawa and Washington can have with respect to who can use the Northwest Passage.
The impact of climate change and global warming. from what I have noticed in the Arctic, ice in general, old ice included, is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So the Arctic is opening up in terms of waterway. My greatest concern is ships coming into our communities from the other side of the world. That makes me feel insecure, which means that Canadian government will have to have a much bigger military presence in the Arctic now. From that point of view, Canadian government will have to involve Inuit at the political level in a much bigger way than they are doing now.
And I worry about climate change and hurricanes that are starting to come to our lands, because that changes how our food security is handled, and not being able to eat the food that I totally take for granted today, and I realize I maybe shouldn't.
One of the major concerns that we have today as Inuit is food security. We need to be able to have access and the rights to our food, and we need safe habitat for things like marine mammals such as whales, seals, these kind of things. And if there was any activity in the Arctic of shipping or shipping routes in the Arctic, then certainly they would have an impact on that.
The Circumpolar North is opening up very quickly now. And coming with that, I think, is offshore oil and gas development. And to me, the greatest risk to my security is those companies that operate in the offshore could do major damage to our marine environment.
Oil exploration, with the melting of the sea ice, more activity through the Northwest Passage, oil tankers delivering oil. We need to have more control over those types of activities to make sure that they don't ruin our environment and our way of life.
What I say to mining industry and other major developers who are coming into our communities is that they have to abide by the rules.
I think the greatest threat is not having checks or balances in place for all these other world powers to come into our region, and them not knowing who we are and what we stand for, just coming in and driving through or taking resources without having care for the animals and for the environment and for our own health.
I think the greatest threat is having someone speak for us, someone else, where the Inuit are not included at the table.
If Inuit are not participants to the discussions when it comes to opening up of the Arctic, the opening up of the seaways, and also the lack of infrastructure that would help contribute to ensuring that Inuit are comfortable with being able to manage the projected increased traffic into their area, and as well as the global pressures when it comes to our harvesting rights and what that could mean.
Inuit have to be involved when other countries are fighting over sovereignty over Inuit land.
My patriotism kind of relates to how Aboriginal people are treated, and bringing them to the table, whether it's politics or education or healthcare. If we have more representation from Aboriginal people and that encouragement from the government, then I would probably be more patriotic.
I would feel that my patriotism was threatened if our Canadian government made decisions without our input and went back to the days that we don't want to go back to, of 1950s, 1960s, and probably even before that, of where someone in Ottawa made decisions and that was the way it went.
We need to be engaged, really engaged, because these are our lives we're talking about. And not just our lives, the lives of our children and future generations.
Being secure means for me to have my family and my community And knowing that they're safe, that gives me security. But it also makes me feel secure knowing that the future generation will have the same feeling that I have in the area that we live, that they feel that they can go anywhere, travel anywhere within our region, and not have to prove to somebody else that this is their homeland.
When you live in the north, it's good to have that feeling that your country is behind you, that you have the respect of your country, that they respect you enough to look out for your needs as well, right? And listen to you and be active and willing partners.
When you understand both ways today, that is security. When I understand my way of life in Inuktitut, that's my security. When I understand the way of life in Kanunatitut, the politics, the involvement, the voting, that's my security. So it goes both ways.
There has to be a human dimension to the solutions for sovereignty, and to ensure that the people that live there are patriotic to their country. They have to be part of the solutions, they have to be part of the decisions and the process for decision making.
Niriuktunga tamakkoa Inuit kauye maniriyanga. Qablunaalok Inungittu kauye maniriyanga. Katitautiarlutik. Nalimutiartumik. Isumaleorutauyunnarpata ukiortartor pidjutigillugu. Kisermiungillutik. Nalimutiarlutik.
Inuit are generally welcoming people. We want to work with other people. And it's just how do we do that? I guess it's the number one question.
If you look at the Inuit number of Inuit in the globe, we are only 160,000. But so far we have reached political results within 30 years.
The Inuit world, Circumpolar world, have always helped each other, and that's why I feel patriotic to my fellow Inuit, no matter where they are.
We can agree with our own people, and on these things we can have a dialogue with our partners.
Inuit are so patriotic, very, very patriotic Canadians, despite the fact that, you know, they have been used as, or maybe because of the fact that they've been used as sovereignty flagpoles.
We need to remind the governments we've been living in the north forever, and guess what? Our neighbors, our fellow Inuit have been living there as well. So I think, you know, patriotism may mean something for the Prime Minister or the presidents that are putting up their flag in the north, but for people that actually live there, again, we think that's a bit childish. And we should look at how practically, you know, what can we bring to the table where, you know, we stop putting up these sort of artificial crises or artificial sort of symbols to sort of divide people. We don't want to divide people, we want to bring people together. We want to bring all Inuit together so that we have a better future.